Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new series where we will go over the state of mobile gaming for the first half of 2024. With us to discuss essentially the market dynamics, genre comparisons, and then to take a look at top performing games and interesting new releases is Stan Minisoff from AppMagic. Welcome, Stan.
Thank you. Thank you, Joseph. Really glad to be here and really glad to shed some knowledge of what was going on in the first half of 2024.
Let's just dive in. What's going on with the market, Stan?
Oh, that's a good question. And I've got some good news really here. So looking at the overall market dynamics, we've all seen that in the post-COVID handover period, it was pretty rough. It was really turbulent, lots of layoffs, and for the first time ever, as an industry, we've been declining.
Right.
So right now it seems we are stabilizing at last. So comparing the overall worldwide revenue dynamic to the first half of 2023, we can see that the numbers are pretty much the same. So we are not growing yet, but at least we are not falling either. So I think that's good news.
Right. And when you say the games revenue worldwide, that's mobile gaming, right?
Absolutely. Right. We are talking about mobile gaming first and foremost.
So maybe one comment I can make as well is, to your point, I think this is a really important chart for people to see and to understand, because a lot of what happened with COVID is that there was this huge growth, right, in terms of monetization and revenue being generated, and a lot of the executives at many game studios linearly extrapolated that growth and made a lot of hiring decisions and growth plans based upon that. But then this chart then explains, why do we see so many layoffs today? Why do we see so many companies retrenching? And this is exactly the reason why. But yeah, please go ahead, Stan.
Yeah, sure thing. You've just mentioned it. If you look at 2021, the numbers are crazy. And from this year, we were going down. So for the first time, luckily, we are on a plateau. And so far, the second half of the year is looking good as well. So there is a chance we will end up stabilized or maybe even growing a little bit, which is really important right now for the whole industry. If we look at the downloads, the situation might be even better. So the downloads, there was a 1 to 2% growth compared to the first half of 2023. Why is it important? Because previously, a big piece of this pie was driven by hyper-casual games, which feel pretty rough during the last couple of years. Post-IDFA, privacy policy, basically balancing the CPI and the LTV of the users was pretty hard. So without this big category and a lot of new releases among hyper-casual games, it's really great to see that the number of downloads are increasing as well. It is, I'd say, not as vivid as the revenue growth, but at the same time, it's a good factor.
And Stan, when we see that drop from 2022, the 27.4, like in the from 22 to 23, do you attribute that to the hyper casual, or do you have any theories or thinking in terms of why we see that bigger drop from between 22 and 23? And then do you have any thoughts on what are your prognostications on the second half of this year?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'd say there were apparently two reasons. First of all, we've mentioned it already, hyper casual shrinking as a category and affecting the whole market. And secondly, during the COVID, and we also already mentioned it, the companies were growing big. The user acquisition campaigns were also growing big. So there were a lot of scalings going on. Post-COVID, for a lot of games, these scaling stopped. So for the last year, we could see for a lot of major players in the market that their focus shifted from trying to acquire new users rather to working with the Liveops, working with new vans, operating and already launched games rather than trying to scale new titles. And that might be another reason for this little but still visible drop in the downloads.
Right. And maybe one thing I can mention anecdotally, that I don't know how big of a factor this is, but I do know that in the past, there used to be a lot of game studios that had very aggressive UA models that would basically bake in very rosy projections in terms of, ROAS and things of that nature over time. And I think that since we've seen the lack of profitability in certain games and game performance, I think there's more of conservatism with respect to how aggressive you are with your UA model. So I'm not sure to what degree that is a factor, but I know that's been happening in terms of like being less aggressive with the UA models.
Absolutely, absolutely, totally agree there. And I'd say that the major reason for this year to be looking quite good so far regarding the downloads is that some of big releases that happened during the last couple of years, like Monopoly Go, like Last Word Survival that we're gonna discuss, like Squad Busters, all of them scaled a lot during the end of the last year and the beginning of this one. So I'd
Yeah.
say the picture might be a little bit different for the second half. And you can also see that for the previous years, the second half of the year is usually not as impressive in downloads than as the first half.
Right. And I just wrote something recently on Monopoly Go and Royal Match, and what we saw was a really dramatic decline in downloads. So
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the main reason for that is that both of the games, they experienced a real big scale, and now they're trying to boost their LTV up and to work with already acquired user base rather
right.
than look for new audience. By the way, talking about looking for the new audience and markets, if we look at the Tier 1 West specifically, one of the most popular niches out there, one of the most popular markets, the situation is even better. So there is
Mm,
not just stabilizing of the market or a plateau of the revenue, but there is a significant growth in the mobile revenue going on with 7% growth compared to 2023. And this is big. Like, this is even bigger than for 2022 and almost on par with the last COVID year, 2021. It's really important because Tier 1 West is one of the main drivers of the whole mobile games revenue. So with Tier 1 East, by the way, declining a little bit despite the growth of several titles, this is important. So it means basically that for a lot of titles out there, if you play your cards right, if you work with already launched games, boosting Liveops, working with mechanics, introducing new monetization features, you can still be successful and you can grow with the industry.
great.
So good news as well, especially if you're
Yeah.
focusing as a developer on Tier 1 West region. Going from there, regarding the downloads, the situation is pretty much the same. So we can see that the main growth factor of the revenue was not because of the new audience coming to the games, but rather of already existing user base interacting, paying more, playing more, engaging more. So I'd say that the majority of the market was more about already veteran projects and already games that are pretty famous and that are in status quo in the top charts, and their attempts to enhance the live ops and the events rather than trying to acquire users more, to monetize them, and to come up with new launches and new releases. So in general, I'd say that's a new trend compared to like 5 or 10 years ago, where we were as an industry. We are focusing more, we are maturing, and we are focusing more on operating and already existing titles rather than trying to look for the trends and to come up with new releases each year.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've anecdotally heard about as a general trend as well, which is to your point. A lot of the sort of the execs at major studios have been talking about, okay, yeah, we're actually going to pull resources and budget from new game development, and we're just going to try to live operate and put resources into what we know is working until things settle down in terms of more having a more stable market environment so that they can plan better and things like that. So
Yeah,
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 there's
absolutely.
everything that you're saying seems to align with what a lot of conversations that I'm having with a lot of game industry folks.
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising. Just
Yeah.
judging by Supercell, they really shifted their focus from trying to come up with new titles, killing their new projects in soft launch, rather to expanding their self system and focusing much more on driving live ops and events. And the results are here. We've all seen what was done with Brawl Stars, going from
Yes.
like historically top low to the biggest revenue for basically for all their lifetime. and we will definitely talk about it
Yeah,
down the road.
I can't wait to talk about that.
Yeah.
But to your point, though, I think that Brawl Stars is actually a very important data point, just because it's a big game, it's a highly visible game, and
Hmm.
just the dramatic, revenue increase and performance increase of that game that team has executed upon. I think there are so many companies now looking at Brawl Stars and trying to figure out, okay, Brawl Stars made this huge improvement. How can we do the same thing? And yeah, I do think that increasingly what we've been seeing, to what you've already said, and what I've been hearing anecdotally, is a shift towards having a greater focus on live ops and trying to understand how to optimize live ops. That does seem to be a greater focus, and the Brawl Stars example is one that really, catalyzed a lot of folks to really start to look at that much more deeply.
Absolutely. So, talking about big games and top charts, let's have a closer look at what was going on with the top grossing games, because I mean the correlations and the differences that happened to the charts are pretty interesting to explore. Well, first of all, right from the get-go, comparing the top 10 worldwide charts of the grossing games from January to June, we can see that some of the contenders made it out of the top league. Just a quick note here, it doesn't really mean that there are some problems, because it's a natural state of things when the games are fluctuating in and out of top 10. It's absolutely normal, it can be seasonal. So I'm sure Coinmaster, TFT Tactics, and Genshin Impact are doing pretty well, and just looking at their numbers, it is true.
Mm-hmm.
But like this June and this half of the year, they're not here with us. At the same time, looking at the elephant in the room, Dungeon and Fighter Origin, crazy boost. Like the game appeared in the second
Yep.
half of May and rocketed up in the top charts. And I'm sure we will discuss it as well, but it's crazy, and I have to mention it, that it's only solely to iOS. So apparently it was not introduced to Google Play, but I'm sure it was introduced to Google Play analogs in China. And it is only in China. So, I mean, only one region, only one platform. The numbers are absolutely crazy. Going from there, Royal Match still going strong, which is interesting because it's apparently the only new Match 3 title that not only made it to the top, but stayed in the top, which
Right.
appears to be much more difficult as we see nowadays.
Yeah.
Last Word
To
Survival.
your
Yeah,
point, I think that some of the this chart in particular, I think is very interesting for people to look at, because the market dynamics between January and June are quite different. And
oh
to your
yeah,
point, there's a few kind of grudge matches or like battles that we're seeing in the charts, or that's like how I like to characterize it, which is, now Dungeon and Fighter versus Honor of Kings. Because, the other thing that people don't understand is that if Honor of Kings is listed here as, one, two, three, four, fifth, what they also don't understand is, because this is a Chinese game in the Chinese market, we're only seeing part of the revenue because there are so many alternative
yes.
app stores and things like that. So like the money that being generated by Dungeon and Fighter Origin and Honor of Kings is crazy. And so that's one battle. The other battle that I wrote about recently was like Monopoly Go versus Royal Match. It does seem like Royal Match has weathered this kind of decline in downloads much better from January to June. And so we'll see how that plays out. And then the other interesting battle is Whiteout Survival versus Last War
Oh
Survival.
yeah.
So yeah, and it seems like Last War is kind of making some headway there, but these are interesting kind of battles to watch for. And so yeah, great chart, this one.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I mean, easily for Dungeon and Fighter or Honor of Kings, the real overall revenue can be twice as much, can be three
Right.
times as much, which is absolutely crazy for the overall worldwide market. But even looking at iOS only and China only, it's already huge. Okay, so, and it's really interesting you've mentioned both Last War Survival and Whiteout Survival, because historically these are 4-week strategies, and they're both really high in LTVs, which is really sweet, but at the same time really difficult to develop. For these two games, there are two competitors on the ring. There are other games in the industry, there are other games in Forex strategy, but they definitely look at each other first and foremost. And especially it's vivid when we look at last war survival user acquisition strategies. So just looking at the graphs, you can see how they try to have this gap in the downloads and in marketing campaigns compared to Whiteout survival to be just a little bit over the top.
Mm-hmm.
And well, the results are here. At the same time, they're working much, much better with the core mechanics, with the meta, and especially with Liveops. And the overall result is that they made it to the top 3, while Whiteout survival, well, it grew as well, but only to the 9th position.
Yeah, and maybe I could also, for our audience, provide a little bit of context just so they kind of understand some of the dynamics behind these two games and the companies behind them. So first of all, Century Games was actually, so I used to work at a company called Fun Plus that launched King of Avalon, which is a game I led, but then they also have Guns of Glory, State of Survival, things like that. The Century team actually was all of the old like social gaming assets and other assets was sold, and they created a new entity. The former COO of Fun Plus joined, became the CEO of Century. And I think the very interesting thing that happened with Century Games is they adopted kind of a different development model, one that's really oriented towards high player validation, really quick iterations, and small teams that scaled later. And so I feel like this was an opportunity that Fun Plus let go, like they kind of missed. Whereas the Century Games team, with under the leadership of CQ and also Shang, who kind of joined as their CTO, I think really figured out a good way of doing development better than previously, and so they kind of changed that. And the first fund, the Last War guys, are actually I don't know the exact kind of history, but it's actually there's some history with Elex, the guys that that were also in Forex for a very long time. So these are companies that have good leadership, and they've got experienced game developers there. And the other thing you mentioned, UA. So some people are already aware of this, but one of the things that Whiteout Survival kind of popularized with this was this notion of taking an existing game with high conversion, more of like a with a focus in terms of like being able to attract a lot of users, have that gameplay be the initial gameplay experience, and then shifting to Forex. So kind of the thinking was like there used to be like fake ads to get players into a game. What they did is they took like Frozen City, and they noticed that Frozen City was performing extremely well, and kind of made that the kind of like the theme and the initial gameplay that, and then they shifted to Forex. And Last War Survival also then adopted that strategy, and that's the strategy that's really been powering the success of Last War and Whiteout Survival. They're both using that strategy to a lot of success in terms of being top 10 grossing game, and we'll see how that battle plays out. But yeah, that's one of the more interesting grudge matches to watch over time.
Absolutely. So then let's dive deeper. Let's discuss the games we've just mentioned, at least some of them, to have a better optic at what is going on. So first, an obvious elephant in the room. But before that, maybe we can focus just for a sec only on the top West crossing games, because there are some interesting things going here as well. When we take big Chinese titles and big Asian RPGs out of the equation, which is important, we can see that there were some shifts. Well, first of all, Last War, we've already mentioned it. It grew, but not as much as in the World War ratings, which basically means that a big piece of their revenue is coming from Asian region, which is interesting. Also, Brawl Stars, we've already mentioned it. We will discuss it for sure, but this growth, I can't say was inevitable, but it is super impressive. And I think everyone in the industry are looking at them right now and thinking, okay, so what is the main reason? What are the main drivers? How did they manage to do this? And can we, as a team, do the same thing? And well, spoiler alert, potentially yes, but if we implement it right. So that said, let's go to the games themselves. Elephant in the room, Dungeon and Fighter Origin. So to be honest, I haven't played the game. I've seen some of the YouTube videos. From what I grasp, it's an action RPG. It's an official version in a pretty popular Chinese franchise that was originally on PC and console, and then made to the mobile, which is especially interesting is that they didn't change the gameplay or the graphics a lot. So it's basically a really old school graphics, just catered to the mobile from the UX UI perspective to be able to play it. But still, the game just in the lifetime revenue hit almost by this moment $300 million in just 2.5 months, maybe 3, which is insane. And once again, it's iOS only and China. So as we've already discussed, taking into the picture different Chinese stores as alterations of Google Play, it can be easily twice as that. So I'd say that a really, I think, good lesson here to be taught is that Chinese market is absolutely huge. We sometimes forget about it, but it's an obvious example of how just one game with a big fan base in Chinese market can outperform the whole world,
Yep.
which is absolutely crazy.
Right.
Taking from there, the real correlation that I love is Dungeon and Fighter and Diablo. And the reason for that is that both of the games are action RPGs. Both of the games originated from PC and consoles. So this is a part of a long-living franchise. And this is the first super successful game on mobile for both of the franchises. What is really interesting here is that, well, Diablo Immortal apparently was released by Blizzard and they knew what they were doing. They are trying to implement new features, new events, new seasons. So they are really focusing on their player base. And they were and are pretty successful. But just look at these graph. I mean, during 2.5 months, Dungeon and Fighter was able to achieve almost the same numbers as Diablo Immortal during the 2 years since the release. I mean, that is crazy. 2 years compared to 2 months. So that is just a very clear picture that shows how big this number is and how big this Chinese fan base and Chinese audience can help with the boosting of the game.
Yeah, and for people who complain about the monetization mechanics and tactics in Diablo Immortal, if you look at the RPD down there of Diablo versus Dungeon and Fighter, you can see it's over 4x, right? So
yeah, like
so I don't know how popular this game would be in the West.
Yeah, but at the same time, I'm not sure they needed to be popular on the West with numbers like that.
Right.
Yeah. All right, so taking from there, going to the second place, Last War Survival. As we already mentioned, 4X strategy, a pretty developed genre. The game was globally launched at the end of 2023, and the graph shows it really, really clearly. So for the second half of the year, there was a soft launch going really, really stable. Then there was an initial global launch. And then from the beginning of this year, the scaling happened. And they went really, really big. Their main UA strategy is misleading hyper-casual creatives, which is pretty interesting because I say for Whiteout Survival, their main competitor, they are using misleading creatives in some sense as well, but they are rather trying to use more casual mechanics, I'd say, while Last War Survival goes even one step further and introduces a lot of hyper-casual, especially running mechanics. I'm sure you've seen these creatives with a person running with a gun. Yeah. You can see it on the icon as well. What is interesting, and you've mentioned it already, is that they decided to introduce this type of mechanics in the beginning of the game. So basically, for a player, especially when they are casual ones coming from more casual niches, to have a smoother transition into the daunting world of 4X strategies. For the first 20, 30, 40 minutes, you're playing a runner, you're playing a casual game, and then all of a sudden, you're 4X strategy full scale. So I'd say that they made a really good job implementing not just the misleading hyper-casual creatives, but also this part of the initial gameplay and tutorial that helps them to grow. And the growth is definitely there. So comparing them face to face, you can see that for Whiteout Survival, there is this, as I've already mentioned, gap in the downloads that they try to use and try to track. So from the beginning of this year, there was not a single moment when Whiteout survival marketing campaigns overperformed last war. And it's not just downloads, because we all know that sometimes driving pretty heavily and relying pretty heavily on marketing campaigns can lower down your RPD, revenue per downloads, and thus the overall LTV of the project. Not the case here. So they grew both the user base with the marketing campaigns and the average RPD. And I think later this year, closer to maybe November or December, we probably will see them on par, or maybe Last War Survival even has a chance to outperform its competitor. So I think these two are really interesting to track and really interesting to look at for the upcoming second half of the year. And of course, last but not least, the comeback of the year. We've already mentioned it a couple of times, Brawl Stars. Yeah, so just as a heads up, at the end of 2023, the game was all-time low. Really, really struggling with these campaigns, with this user base. At the end of first half of 2024, it's all-time high. The logical question, the reasonable question here might be, what has happened? And I'd say there were two things that Liveops team and Brawl Stars team decided to focus on. The first one was making the game even more casual. So before that, I'd say Brawl Stars was something in between a casual audience and casual approach and more competitive approach with cyber sportsmen trying to compete with different leagues, with different ranked games. So what they did, they introduced several changes in a row that made the game to appear still pretty competitive, but at the same time open to any casual type of player. For example, they reworked their ranked league. So instead of going there pretty late down the road, they made it available much earlier, so that each and every casual player can be introduced to the PvP, can be engaged, and then some of them naturally will be drawn away, but some of them will stay and will become more competitive. So I'd say this is one of the main engagement drivers that appeared in the game. Not just that, but this really helped with the retention and with the engagement. At the same time, there was a big focus on new Liveops events, especially collaborating with different IPs, and new monetization techniques. So just to show you, I think the best way to do it is use our Liveops and updates calendar tool available at AppMagic. So what we did, we've been tracking Brawl Stars for the last year, analyzing and deconstructing each and every update, event, monetization offer, and monetization feature. And you can see it very clearly. First of all, you can see this growth in the revenue metrics. So we are looking at, of course, revenue performance right here. The first major change appeared in the end of the last year, in the beginning of this one, and it was a whole rework and update of the Battle Pass. So what they did, they rebalanced the rewards inside, making the free pass more appealing to casual players. And at the same time, they added an additional layer of paying options. So it's like 1 free, 2 paying options. It's pretty trendy right now in core and casual games, having 2 paying passes at once. And it results in a great boost, like twice as much in revenue, and continue to grow. Then what they did, and you can see it in the second red circle, a lot of minor changes to the rank system to the leagues, catering to more casual audience. And then 2 really big peaks, and this is the big work and big impact on the events, Baby Shark and Godzilla. 2 absolutely new, not just event, but a combination of events with a big IP backing them up. And it really worked. So we can see, just judging by the numbers, that it's not only just a steady growth, but also big peaks, helping both with engagement and with the revenue. So all in all, I'd say this is something that really helped to, reanimate the title, to say at least. And I think that's one of the main reasons why Supercell decided to push Squad Busters, the new game, in the global launch from the soft launch.
Right. And Stan, one of the things that when I think about Brawl Stars from a gaming exec or product manager perspective, the 2 things that really stand out to me is that, one, at least anecdotally, and from a lot of folks when I looked at this game, it seems like there's a much greater female audience for this kind of a game, like a shooter type of game or multiplayer PvP type of game than other games. It's very similar to like if you were to look at the audience for a CS:GO versus Valorant, right? Many more
Mm-hmm.
females in Valorant versus CS:GO. In Brawl Stars, I think I don't have the numbers, but just anecdotally, when I talk to different people about the games that they play and a lot of younger kids and things like that, I see a lot more girls playing Brawl Stars than others. Speaking to your point about casualization, and the other thing that I notice is just like in terms of the orientation of the gameplay, right? The gameplay
Mm-hmm.
itself is something, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but it's very shallow in the sense that
Mm-hmm.
like if you were to take the two extremes in terms of from a gameplay perspective of Brawl Stars versus like a Wild Rift, for example, the amount of complexity and depth in terms of progression, strategy, depth in a Wild Rift is at the far extreme compared to like a Brawl Stars. And the other thing that you'll notice is that the impact of that you'll notice is that there's a lot of game modes. And I believe
Mm-hmm.
that they have more game modes relative to like a Wild Rift, which has just a single, primary map and mode, is that it keeps the game interesting. So you have a lot more modes that speaks to that the gameplay itself is basically more casual than like a Wild Rift with more complexity, depth, all that kind of stuff. You have to memorize a lot of things in terms of champions, items, things of that nature. And so it would make sense what you're talking about in terms of casualizing this approach to live ops because of one, I would say the demographic of the players that play the game, and two, in terms of the gameplay itself, which is, in my opinion, much more casual than another multiplayer PvP shooter or MOBA type of game.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think with Squad Busters, they even took it one step further, so
Mhm.
making it even more casual. I'd say what the definition we love to use in our research team is mobile like Wild Reef is very, very strategic oriented. I mean, there is depth, there are different characters, you have to really know what are they about. And it's really demanding on UX UI, for example, because
Okay.
you really have to know what is going to happen next. For Brawl Stars and especially for Squad Busters, it's more on the chaotic fun of side of things. You don't know in advance what will be the modes, so you don't really take your heroes based on the modes. It's not a strategic depth, but rather chaotic fun part of the gameplay where you try to adapt on the go and say, okay, so like 4 minutes, super fun, super fast. I mean, for Wild Rift, it can be easily 20, 30, 40 minutes, like a full scale PC slash console MOBA, which is totally fine. But I generally believe that it's just two different types of audience these games try to cater to.
Right.
So, taken from there, we've talked about the overall market, state of the market, and we talked a little bit about the top grossing charts. Then let's have a deeper look inside the niches and inside the genres. So, what was going on with the most interesting genres and how they feel up to date? Of course, it won't be possible to cover all of them at once. So, instead of that, we will focus on several major casual genres which are pretty popular among developers and at the same time that have been trending lately. So I think it might be really useful to discuss Match 3 and Casual Casino as big and very famous genres that had several big changes recently in the first half of 2024. And at the same time, look at emerging niches like Merge 2, Match 3D, or Idle Tycoons that during the last couple of years, they were growing really, really fast. So it's interesting to see, are they an interesting, unobvious hidden gem as a niche for developers still, or they're much, much redder right now and closer to, say, Match 3. So it's really important to know what is what.
Okay. And just looking at this chart, Stan, when I see your categorization and your characterization of match three complex metagame. So for this specific categorization, would that I assume that includes the Playrix games, the Scapes games, basically, uh,
Oh, absolutely,
because they
absolutely.
have a
So this,
complex metagame. And I would
yeah,
assume that you don't include Candy Crush because it's more saga map oriented. And then kind of like what I would consider in between a game like a Royal Match, would that go into the complex metagame or would that go somewhere else?
I'd say that that's a great question, first and foremost. So in our categorization, Royal Match goes into the complex metagame.
Okay.
You're totally right that it's closer and something in between simple meta that is made by King, or the lack of meta at all, or like renovation meta that is usually used by Playrix.
Mhm.
But I'd say that there is some meta overall, and we've seen, for example, this year, uh, going deeper and deeper, developing it more and more. For example, albums were introduced with collectibles, and just recently, a month ago, they decided to switch it, and instead of making it a permanent core feature or meta feature, they decided to make it a time-limited event, which additionally tries the FOMO from the players and, of course, drives the engagement from the players.
Right.
So we can definitely see that the meta was something in between, but right now it's becoming more and more complex and more deep. Going from there, let's talk about match 3 and casual casinos, as you mentioned. Casual casino might be a good genre to start because the situation here is pretty interesting. So historically, the genre was dominated by Coinmaster, and I mean, it was the origin root of the genre as it goes. So you can see like the blue, the genre was blue, came out of a blue, and it consisted of blue all the way. But several years ago, Monopoly Go hit the gas pedal and made it to the top. So they grew really big. And I say right now, the question will be, what's up with Monopoly Go? Because is it still dominating the genre, or there were some changes for the niche? And are there any chances to compete in this niche? So if you're a developer, should you try and maybe come up with a casual casino game, or there is a status quo and it's almost impossible to make it to the top? Judging from here, I'd say that looking at the genre as a
Actually, Stan,
whole,
could you go
yeah,
back one second? Because I think one thing that
absolutely,
I
yeah,
think is an
yeah,
interesting dynamic here is that um, what it one interpretation of this graph is that Monopoly Go actually dramatically grew the overall market, right?
yes,
And
yeah,
because I would say that just my understanding, if you look at the game design and like the core of it, it really is very similar to Coinmaster. And so
yeah,
it does feel like, and that one, they grew the market, it's declining now, but I would suspect that this could potentially suggest that there should be more competitors in this space. So I think we'll likely, and this is just my guess, I think that people will look at the success of Monopoly Go, despite its kind of bigger fall throughout the first half of this year, and try to start innovating around different ways of attacking this problem, because they would believe, game developers would believe, that there is something here that's not being exploited as much as it could be.
absolutely. That's a really great idea. I'd say that for Monopoly Go, obviously, it was a question of big IP, and it helped Scopely a lot. And I mean, Scopely, with their resources, with their knowledge of marketing campaigns, they really had a big advantage here compared to all the other developers in the industry. The thing that not a lot of developers out there discuss, from my point of view, maybe discuss too little, is that Monopoly IP is not just about lowering CPIs when acquiring users, which is totally, absolutely true, but it's also about maybe having a much more comfortable core gameplay that helps you to implement different events, helps you to implement different time-limited offers much more consistently than for Coinmaster. So we've done a big research on Monopoly Go events and Liveops, and what we've seen is that for Coinmaster, their core gameplay is built the way that it doesn't really help to go out to other type of gameplays, to other type of meta activities. So the moment you're interrupted, and you will be interrupted, you feel like you're abandoned a little bit. So for each and every activity Coinmaster introduces outside of the core gameplay, you feel as a player that something is disturbing. And this is a really big lack of the current core gameplay, because I mean, for casual casino, for Coinmaster, let's be honest here, it becomes pretty boring after some time. So you need some type of addition, something to spice it up. For Monopoly Go, using the tabletop mechanics and using the both visuals and the mechanics of just another approach, another angle, they have much more possibilities for introducing new events, new Liveops, new monetization features right on the board, without going from the core, without going from the meta, without basically interrupting your flow. And flow is one of the most important feelings for casual casino games, I'd say, for the players that really into it. So I totally agree with you here, because if we take this into the consideration, it means that there is a lot of opportunity for other developers out there as well to enhance this formula and think, okay, so what is missing right now? How can I cater to a broader audience? Or how can I make the core gameplay be more adaptive to different variations so that I can engage the audience more? So absolutely, I think there is a chance we will see maybe some contesters come into this niche, maybe from match 3 niche, that try to use best practices out of other genres and bringing them to casual casino.
Right. And I think to your point, there is an opportunity for innovation in terms of maybe mid-late game, core gameplay. But I also think if we look at what some of the games that we just looked at, because the RPDs for these games are relatively good, right? So if you were to also think, could you actually do something like a Whiteout or Last War, where because you've got healthy RPDs here, but if you're able to top a funnel some other mechanic or some other theme or something to draw in players and convert them into the higher RPDs of the core gameplay here, that that you could potentially also help drive significantly your game using the same tactics and techniques that Last War and Whiteout Survival have used. So I actually think that there is a lot of the main takeaway for me is that this space is under innovated, that there is a lot of room for growth, both on the front end, and in terms of top of funnel, as well as the back end to the things that you're talking about. And from a metaphor perspective, whether it's a board or whether it's lots or something else. So I just think that there is this chart to me screams out, hey guys, look, game developers, this is a wide open space for people to start attacking. And it just hasn't been figured out well enough yet, in my opinion.
True. Just don't get us wrong. It will still be difficult because
it's very difficult.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean,
still,
the
there's a
price
lot of
is
space.
pretty sweet as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, just looking at the numbers, if we look at the raw data, we can see that compared to the first half of the last year, it more than doubled. Compared to the 2022, is 3 times more. I mean, for a pretty established niche, it's an incredible growth. So definitely the majority of these was driven by Monopoly Go, as we've already discussed. What is interesting is that Monopoly Go had a real big user acquisition campaign in the second half of the last year. And so right now, the downloads in the niche are going a little bit down organically. But at the same time, the revenue is still going up because it's a consequence of Monopoly Go buying a big part of the traffic and monetizing them pretty effectively. So for downloads, you can see that they're pretty much on the same level, maybe even a little bit less, like a couple of percent. And that's because Monopoly Go in itself, its download share has decreased from 75% to 50%. And I mean, the share of the whole niche, of the whole genre. From the revenue perspective, it's still 60 to 70% of the whole niche. So there is an opportunity there for sure, both for Monopoly Go team and for other developers out there who has enough experience and enough resources to try to compete in this niche. By the way, talking about trying to compete, match 3. the king of the red oceans, the one that everybody usually tend to and say to as, yeah, you don't want to go there. Like, that's the territory that's the dark territory, Simba, we never go there. So the question after Royal Match appeared several years ago suddenly appears, maybe it is not as impenetrable as we used to think about it. So right now, we have seen during last year, for example, quite a lot of developers trying to tackle this, to test these red ocean waters and see can they make it to the top. So it's really interesting to see right now whether or not it had an effect on the overall market niche and whether or not these titles making it to the top remain there, because it's one thing when you try to scale and go to the top 20, top 10, and a very different one when you try to be there for several months, for half a year, maybe for a year straight. So just looking at the numbers, we can say that the genre is still in pretty good shape. I mean, it's not growing as much as Casual Casino or Merge 2 or Match 3D, but the growth is very, very steady. So it's like going from 6 to 7 to 800 millions, which is very, very steady, especially considering the overall decline of the overall mobile revenue industry. This is pretty good numbers. But at the same time, you can see that the downloads had a drastic fall. So like going from 60 to 44, even less than in 2022, which once again shows us that the majority of the revenue drivers were from already existing audience. And once again, it's not the first, it's not the last time during this episode we are talking about Liveops. It's all due to the Liveops, to the monetization, and to operating an already existing game. So as an industry, we are at this moment where we have to think really deep and care really a lot about already existing players and not just try to accumulate as much volume in user acquisition as we can. Looking at the top grossing, there are some interesting things here. Well, first of all, Chrome Valley customs that appeared last year, and everybody were looking at them because what they did was pretty brave. They decided to go bold and to use the best Match 3 practice and best Match 3 approaches, but focusing on a male audience in a historically female niche. Mm-hmm. Last year, they were looking really good. And I mean, in the first half of 2023, they made it to the top 10. Right now, not so much. 9th position, and they're going down. So right now, they earn half as much as in the first half of last year. So it seems that something is not working. They either should go deeper with an already audience they acquired, or try to go broader, which might be a bit difficult considering their main setting and considering the type of audience they try to go deeper before. So I'm really interested in how the things will be going with Chrome Valley Customs, because as far as I remember, they also began experimenting with Liveops. They introduced IP. They partnered with Exhibit, if I'm not mistaken. So this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm kind of surprised about is that when we look back, I actually was I was suspecting that somebody would actually figure out more of the RPG battle match 3, mm-hmm. like Empires and Puzzles and a Legendary Game of Heroes. I don't think they quite hit the mark in the same sense that you don't have like a match 3, RPG battle match 3 that's more like Brawl Stars, more casual, and one that has a greater balance between male and female. But I do think that that's, to me, the opportunity that's not being exploited in match 3. Like, I wouldn't try and go head to head against a Candy Crush. I wouldn't try to go head to head in terms of like escapes type game. But if I were looking at match 3 with complex meta, I would be looking at these games that really, in my opinion, didn't quite hit the mark with the RPG battle. But I would say I would try to think, if I'm trying to make a game like Brawl Stars for match 3, how would I do that? And
that's a good observation. Yeah,
I think I think that's the big, for me, when I look at the match 3 space, I think that's the opportunity.
It is true. It is true. I'd say that. I mean, there are escapes games and Playrix decided to like perfect an already existing formula to the max. So it's really difficult to come up with something brand new there. And we've seen it with Royal Match and with Dream House. They're a new game in development, and the experiments and the updates that appear in the game, we can see that they try to, go and experiment with the core a little bit, having different implementations and different parts of other niches and other genres into the match 3 formula, which might work, apparently. Surprisingly, there is a newcomer, a Piggy Kingdom. You can see it on the 10th place for the first half of this year. And my main surprise is that it's a clone of Royal Match in the like aesthetics from Coinmaster, like the combination of the best practices in the industry. What is surprising is that usually in really big established markets with status quo, when you try to copycat a game, you are almost settled to fail. So there is no chance you will make it to the top 50 even, not talking about top 10. So this is something really interesting going on right now. Additionally, I went and checked out the website of the development team, and it's very surprising because there is not much information there. They're pretty unknown as developers. I can't even say what type of game. I think this is the first game they've developed. So not a lot of information out there. So, I mean, really interesting team of developers, no additional information about them, coming up with a clone of Royal Match and making it to the top 10 in the grossing. This is something I didn't expect at all for this niche. I'm not sure they will be able to stay there, just like with Chrome Valley Customs, but I'm really surprised that this is like a copycat that made it so far and made it so high. So
yeah,
who knows?
in my experience, I've noticed that any of the companies that are successful in match 3 have some historical legacy context behind them, right? Whether it's like Mansion where it was actually AppLovin and then they pulled a bunch of leads from Jam City, or any of these companies that are successful in match 3, including Royal Match, right? They're they're basically people who have done it before. I don't ever see. So I'm suspicious of Piggy Kingdom, even if there's no information about them. They're ex somebody, or they're being backed by some company that has experience, like Path Forward Survival is basically Elex or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Same thoughts here. So there is no chance new developers can come to the niche and just take it by storm. There should be something there, either experienced developers in the team or backing it up, as you mentioned, with some information, experience, and best
I'd love to be wrong on that. I hope they are actually a team that's just like brand new and just like, oh, hey, we got a top 10 match 3 complex metagame just from the start. But in my experience, every time I've done enough research into one of these guys, especially for match 3, you generally find out, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, we'll see. Talking about good experience and good legacy, so Mystery Matters by Playrix, it rose in the rankings and almost doubled its revenue to the previous half year, which is pretty impressive. I mean, Playrix already has a very wide portfolio and a very good portfolio in the top grossing, with dominating it almost. But it's still great to see that their new titles make it to the top 10 too. I'd say that one of the reasons were scaling, as usual, that was happening in last year's autumn, and the growth in the revenue is one of the results. But also what they did, they made a big impact and big push into Liveops. I think what they did, they just introduced the best working strategies from other Scapes games, like Expedition Event, like time-limited events, and all of them helped with both engaging the players and growing up the revenue and conversion to the monetization. So I think we'll see what is going with these Red Ocean in the second half of the year, but so far the results were pretty interesting, especially compared to the last year when there were a lot of newcomers to the niche. Taken from there, and talking about another game with number in the title, another niche, it's merged too with Complex Meta. And this is something really interesting because just like with Casual Casino and Coinmaster, originally it was dominated by merge mention. Like it was on the throne for quite a while, for long enough to Metacore to be noticed by Supercell and back them up. And then I think they're the main founders and owners of the company right now. So it's basically a Supercell portfolio company. But the genre is still growing. So it's not stable as, say, Match 3, but there are a lot of evolution in core, in meta, a lot of experiments, and in events as well. So there are some older games that find better ways to monetize and to retain players due to really improved and good live ops. And despite them being quite old, they compete hard. So you can see Gossip Harbor, you can see Seaside Escape, and especially Travel Town, the red part of this pie, growing bigger and bigger, big enough to dethrone Merge Mansion, which was unimaginable before. So going deeper and exploring the numbers, apparently this niche was really sweet for the developers because in 2022 it was like a little bit over 50 million and 4 times more for the first half of 2024. Pretty impressive. And it's still growing. So if we look at the downloads, in contrast with, say, Casual Casino and Match 3, where the majority of growth was driven by already existing players, here we are talking about new users as well. So the growth is both for the revenue and for the downloads. Usually it means that the genre is still fresh. There is no status quo in the tops. There is a chance for the developers to come up with new mechanics, new ideas, experimenting with the core and meta, and also for already established companies in the top grossing to acquire more users and to retain them. So right now, this niche is still looking pretty good for newcomers. Looking at the top grossing, there are several games that made it out of the top 10, like Merging and Merge Mayor. But the most important part happened to Merge Mansion. We've already mentioned it. Historically, it was the king of the town. Well, not anymore. It was first dethroned by Travel Town, and Travel Town is looking really, really good at the moment with a very good live ops system. And Gossip Harbor and Seaside Escape are also looking really, really solid. What is interesting is that both of these games, Gossip Harbor and Seaside Escape, they were developed by Microphone Limited. And the guys are famous or notorious, if you would like, for taking already working formulas, copycatting them, but tuning the monetization, cranking up the live ops, and using their marketing teams in order to make it to the top. I mean, just from the get-go, both of the games, Gossip Harbor and Seaside Escapes, originally were copycats of Travel Town and Lava Pies. Both games are still in the top grossing of this niche. But Microphone Limited have been actively scaling both of these games and have used the best approaches in live ops. So, I mean, events copying that of Travel Town, like Pick a Box, or Royal Match, like competitive event for 100 of players with social competitive part. Different albums and collectibles with gacha, different PvP unique races. So all of these summed up to a very steady growth in the top grossing. And we also can see some of the newcomers. So for the 7th and 10th position, we can still see that this is a niche that is pretty open for new developers. So I'd say that at the moment, like the middle point of 2024, it is still something that you can try to play with and maybe to have pretty good chances of success. Taking about that, the last number genre in our category, Match 3D. I think a lot of developers out there were looking at this niche because from the first glance, it seems pretty easy to copy. I mean, the basic gameplay is not so difficult, but at the same time, it was growing as crazy. I mean, the top 3 games, Match Factory, grew 14 times. Happy Match Cafe, 2 times. Joy Match 3D, almost 4 times in the revenue. So mainly, this was happening because of the adding new monetization features, and enhancing Liveops. So I'd say that games that already made it to the top, they have significantly increased their revenue compared to the previous half year. So this is another niche that is pretty interesting and pretty sweet for the developers and for both new and experienced ones. Just looking at the numbers compared to 2022, I mean, almost 10 times higher in the revenue. The growth is crazy. Of course, part of the reason is that initially this was a very niche genre. And usually for this type of genres, when there are a lot of newcomers and a lot of experiments going on, we can't see this type of growth coming in several years. But here, I'd say the possibilities and the opportunities are still there, because reasons of the revenue growth are mainly because of several titles. First of all, Match Factory, we've already mentioned it, and it really put a big emphasis on adding up and scaling monetization mechanics. And just looking at their Tier 1 West numbers, you can see that the downloads are growing as crazy as well. So pretty much the same as Merge 2. It's not just catering to an already existing audience, it's also expanding the niche. And I say that for the year, maybe for upcoming 2 years, it will continue to grow, because right now I think it's not saturated yet. So there is still opportunity. And the same goes with the top grossing. So since February, Match Factory has surpassed Triple Match 3D in revenue. We've seen this incredible growth affecting the whole niche. And the game is being actively improved. I mean, looking at the new monetization features like passes, introducing new type of events, and the former leader had added only minor updates. So this is a good lesson for every one of us, that if you really cater to your audience, if you add up both monetization and engagement mechanics, then you can even surpass previous leaders that looked indestructible. The same happened to Coinmaster, the same happened to Merge Mansion. And I'd say that it's like one of the main lessons of today's episode and the first half of 2024. By the way, one of the newcomers, and you can see it on the 10th position, it's, on the 6th, I think, Match Wheeler Makeup ASMR. It's an interesting case because this is a game there is not much to say about, besides the fact that its store, creatives, icon, basically all ASR are all almost entirely misleading. So even just looking, at the name, makeup, ASMR, looking at the icon. And this is interesting because usually when we are talking about misleads, we're talking about still casual things. And here, this is a casual genre and a casual game that uses hyper-casual misleads, just like we've seen with Last Word Survival going to the top. And it worked for both of the games. So there are different opinions about using misleads, about using these type of ads. But you can totally, just judging by the numbers, you can see that it can work for some of the games out there. The question is, can it work long term? Not sure about it. We will see.
Got it.
The last one is Idle Tycoon. So bear with me, it's like the last genre we will talk today. The reason we are talking about it is that because during the last couple of years, it was considered as a growing niche as well, as pretty good for new developers, not so more. So what we can see that, first of all, it is declining, and the developers and the players are less interested in this niche. Maybe it is connected to a lot of new releases, so the genre is just oversaturated. You can see all the newcomers, the Frozen City we've already talked today about, and there are just too much games in the niche, so the players are a little bit bored and a little bit tired by the niche. And you can see it very clearly by the revenue. So it went down almost 10%, and the same with downloads, almost 10% down. So I'd say that if you're looking in the niche, Idle Tycoon is not the best one. The main differences that happened to the top grossing, comparing the first half of previous year to this one, is just some of the veteran games going down, like Idle Lumber and Frozen City, and some of the veteran games going up, like Golden Goblins and Idle Mafia. But not a lot of changes, status quo, a lot of old games. So I'd say that at this point, Idle Tycoon as a niche is looking pretty much as farming. So it's very stable. It's on a plateau. There is a very vivid status quo in the top grossing, and this is not a niche you would love to enter if you want to be really successful and to scale up really rapidly.
Right.
Going from there, talking about new releases and new games. So this is an interesting part, a really exciting one, because it's always really great to look at the newcomers. First of all, let's look at the most downloaded games for the first half of this year. And among the newcomers, what we can see is, well, first of all, the top one position is definitely a hyper-casual game. So, well, everything is good so far because the major downloaded games are hyper-casual usually. Left to right, Magic dress-up game, hyper-casual mechanics. You choose between the two items of clothing. The graphics is really simple, and I'd say even close to kids' games. Maybe that's one of the reasons for its success, by the way. But you can also see that it's not just about hyper-casual games. So you might notice, for example, some Asian titles, some Asian RPGs in this top, and Squad Busters right on the second position. I'd say that one of the reasons for Squad Busters to appear there is cross-promotion used in all Supercell games. Another reason is a big marketing boost. But at the same time, the same fall in the metrics happened right after the growth. So I'd say that in the second half of this year, there is a chance Squad Busters will not make it even to top 10. I'm talking about top 5. Going from there, so we've looked at the top downloaded games. Let's look at the top grossing. And the situation here is much more interesting. Well, first of all, as we've already mentioned, Dungeon and Fighter Origin, or simple DNF Mobile, on the first place, going strong with almost $300 million in the revenue. Not much to mention here, just to highlight once again that the game reaches its amazing results, being produced only on iOS and only in China. So this is a really interesting case. But looking at the top 10 places overall, you can see that in general, it's very heavily affected by Asian RPGs. A lot of them come into the market, a lot of them becoming really successful, a lot of them having really good RPD numbers. So looking to the right column, you can see that for the majority of the Asian RPGs that appeared this year and made it to the top, the numbers are pretty sweet. So I'd say that right at the moment, we have a domination of Asian RPGs among the top releases, the top new releases. Of course, once again, as with the most downloadable, Squad Busters made it to the top as well. But in comparison, it was like the second most downloadable game, but only the 9th most monetized, which is really important here. Also, a little late to the party, Zenless Zone Zero, a new game by Hoyoverse, a new urban fantasy ARPG. It was released just this July, and it apparently didn't make it to this top. But I'd say that looking at the numbers so far, just like with Supercell and Squad Busters, there was a great initial boost, but then the numbers went down, and it's one of the worst Miyoho launches of all time, compared to Genshin, compared to other games. So that's interesting because, I mean, both the Western and the Eastern developers, they struggle with the same problems, with their new hits trying to come up to the market and make them global and scale.
All right. Is that the end? Is there much more?
I think that's it. We already had a lot of on the table for all listeners.
All right.
So,
well, yeah. So Stan, this is awesome. Thanks so much for basically a pretty in-depth overview of the state of mobile gaming. I think that from my perspective, I think it was a really great coverage, and as far as the overall growth in the market, the different kind of genres, the performance, the top genres, as well as new games and releases and things like that. So definitely appreciate your time. And maybe, Stan, maybe we could end with a little bit more info on AppMagic. And if anybody wanted to contact you, how would they get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Great idea. So AppMagic is an analytical tool for analyzing mobile markets and gaining actionable insights. I usually tend to say that our motto is receiving actionable insights really fast and really at ease, almost by Magic. So for folks out there, we're a sweet combination of market intelligence, analyzing different niches, looking up for competitors for their main metrics like revenue, downloads, retention, DAU/MAU, you name it, and also analyzing markets from game design perspective. So for example, the tool you're looking at right now, Liveops and Updates Calendar, helps to track and to analyze almost 200 casual and core games. What types of events, updates, and monetization features are running inside of them? How are they affecting the performance? So which one of them are more successful? Which one of them, as a developer, you should try and implement in your game as well? How they are made, both from the gameplay perspective and from the business perspective. So what are the main reasons for them to appear in the game? What are the main triggers? And what are the goals they're trying to achieve? Is it growing engagement? Is it growing retention? And so on.
Right. And I would say that this tool here, the Liveops tool, is the one differentiator in terms of AppMagic that I was probably most impressed with. When I think about the other data services, I think you guys have done a really good job on the Liveops side.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, we are proud of it as well. And yeah, to be honest, we extracted tons of insight out of it during the last year. So yeah, if you're looking for tracking all the main players inside the niches, not just your niche, but also other markets, but also because it's really important sometimes, to be aware of everything what's going on. This is one of the main, if not the best tool for this type of research.
Awesome. All right. Well, with that, thank you so much, Stan, for our audience. Catch us next quarter as we'll try and do this every quarter in terms of a state of the mobile gaming market overview. And thank you for joining. Catch you next time.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Stan.
It was a pleasure. Thank Joseph and see you there.
All right,
Bye-bye.
bye.